The rise of the wellness industry over the past decade or so has made some great strides in improving people's health and longevity without medical interventions. Unfortunately, as is the case with many new ideas, it comes with dangers seeking to undermine trust and understanding in medical sciences. With RFK Jr. now as Secretary of Health and Human Services, someone seen as a pioneer of the wellness industry, we're coming to a crossroads of what new ideas of health should be accepted into society and what should be denied to maintain traditional medical practices. The problem we're seeing with the politicization of health and medicine is the outright partisan acceptance or rejection of RFK's goals as HHS Secretary, even though not all of his beliefs are equal. Progressives are now advocating against ideas and entities that they were 4 or 5 years ago, while conservatives are embracing the very same things they were against. We're not really considering what aspects of the Make America Healthy Again movement could actually be a positive change, negative change, or more nuanced in between. So let's go through the good, the gray, and the ugly of RFK's Make America Healthy Again. Like I said, let's start with the good. A good which I don't see how anybody could be against is cleaning up our diets. The US diet is objectively bad, and we're one of the most obese nations on the planet. Now I'll say that it's largely to do with people's individual laziness, lack of discipline, and just gluttony. However, it's also certainly true that we have a bad food culture that promotes very calorically dense foods full of additives that don't have any nutritional value. In fact, an estimated 60 to 90% of the American diet comes from highly processed foods and beverages, which is linked to various health issues like obesity, diabetes, and other chronic diseases. Many of these foods also contain additives that, in moderation, might not have major effects, but in the way that we consume them can be detrimental long term. This is where RFK's push for greater food regulations, similar to that of Europe, could help shift the American diet away from unhealthy additives and high sugars. Europe uses the precautionary principle, which means that if a food product's safety is uncertain, it can be banned or restricted until proven safe. The US, on the other hand, uses a generally recognized as safe system, which allows the use of a substance with a long history of safe use. The generally recognized as safe system allows food manufacturers to determine the safety of certain food additives without pre-approval from the FDA. This causes the US to be more lenient with additives that are banned in Europe. The precautionary principle in EU food regulation and the US generally recognized as safe approach represent two distinct philosophies for managing potential hazards. In the EU, regulators can restrict or ban a substance if there's scientific uncertainty about its safety, while in the US, a substance is generally permitted until a significant risk or harm is proven. Like I alluded to, the EU has banned many additives like potassium bromate, azodicarbonamide, BHA, BHT, titanium dioxide, and certain food dyes. There's also a difference in how we label food. Food labeling in the EU is stricter and more transparent with mandatory front-of-pack warnings for certain ingredients, required listing of ingredients by quantity, specific labels for additives, and nutrition information per amount. In contrast, the US's labeling is less detailed and uses a risk-based approach, providing nutritional information per serving, often uses less specific ingredient names, and has less stringent disclosures for GMOs and certain additives. The biggest difference to me is the calories per weight versus calories per serving. We've all looked at a label surprised at how few calories the label states, just to find out that what would be a pretty normal portion is actually like 8 servings according to the label. I'd say many Americans do need a change in how they view, purchase, and consume food, so I can certainly see some good coming out of a regulation overhaul if RFK Jr. and his advisors stick to these principles. This connects directly to another promise of the Make America Healthy Again directive, which is more gray on the good-bad scale, and that's the fight against chronic disease. A report released by the Make America Healthy Again Commission offered a range of critiques about chronic disease in America, blaming many chronic illnesses on ultra-processed foods, chemicals in the environment, sedentary behavior, and over-reliance on digital devices among children. It also suggests that childhood vaccines need to be studied further, which will be discussed later in the video. The reason it connects is that RFK puts a large share of the blame on our diets, but he also extends blame to other aspects of our food supply, like pesticides and seed oils. And that's where it gets tricky. I agree that almost all of the avoidable chronic diseases in the US can almost entirely be solved by a healthier diet and more exercise. But if you're going to claim that pesticides and oils we've been consuming for quite a while are all of a sudden creating worse health outcomes, I'm going to need some strong evidence. Now, there is some reason to suspect pesticides and potential residue in the food supply, but the severity, the cost-benefit analysis of their use, and alternative ideas require a much more nuanced discussion. The condemnation of pesticides in food found a lot of industry pushback as the report neared its release date. The National Corn Growers Association said in a statement, "The Make America Healthy Again report is filled with fear-based rather than science-based information about pesticides. We're deeply troubled that claims of this magnitude are being made without any scientific basis or regard for a long history of EPA expert evaluations of these products." It's also caused a schism between members of the Trump cabinet who don't even agree on the issue. Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins and EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin, who both sit on the commission and have more direct oversight over the industry, were careful to ensure that farmers felt like the administration remained behind them, despite the criticism of pesticides. While Kennedy and others in the movement have questioned the safety or health of ingredients in foods, Rollins stressed that the U.S. food supply remains safe. She specifically said, "The food supply is 100% safe. It isn't just safe, it's the safest in the world. And it's really, really important that we continue to make sure that people understand that." On the seed oil debate, there's a little bit of correlation versus causation issue here. The research from the American Heart Association and others has consistently shown that plant-based oils reduce bad cholesterol, lowering the risk of heart disease and stroke, especially compared with sources high in saturated fat like butter and beef tallow. That's found in new research from Brigham and Women's Hospital scientists as well. A study of more than 200,000 adults over 30 years found that people who ate the highest amounts of butter had a 15% higher risk of dying than those who ate the least, and people who ate the most plant-based oils, including seed oils, had a 16% lower risk than those who ate the least. Christopher Gardner, the director of nutrition studies at the Stanford Prevention Research Center, has studied the effect of dietary changes on health for more than 3 decades, and served as the chair of the American Heart Association's Nutrition Committee. According to him, while we eat more ultra-processed junk food than we ever have before, the evidence shows that the harms of these foods have more to do with their calories and their high amounts of sugar, sodium, and saturated fat than with seed oil. People critical of seed oil point to their high ratio of omega-6s, but Gardner goes on to say that while omega-3s seem to be a little more anti-inflammatory than omega-6s, this has somehow been flipped into saying that omega-6s are pro-inflammatory. And that just isn't the case. Just because research suggests that omega-3s have stronger anti-inflammatory effects doesn't mean that omega-6s are harmful. People who feel better, lose weight, or have more energy after quitting seed oils are more likely noticing the effects of eating a less processed diet. I can appreciate RFK's concern about inflammation and negative health outcomes caused by dietary ingredients, but the focus on seed oils and even pesticides seems to be misplaced on the hierarchy of what we should be cutting out of our diet. While some things that RFK says are more easily broken down into black and white, his anti-pharma stances are more complex. Behind the incredible pharmaceutical advancements of the past century, there is a real story about the pharmaceutical industry being corrupt that testifies to his anti-pharma stances, most notably being the industry's involvement in pushing opioids by denying their addictiveness when marketing them to doctors. And while the patent monopolies we grant pharmaceutical companies give them an incentive to develop incredible new drugs and vaccines, it also gives them an incentive to push their products as widely as possible, even if it means being dishonest about their benefits and risks, and maximizing profits. Take one prominent example. When the hepatitis C drug Sovaldi first came out of the market, it was being sold here for $84,000 for a 3-month course of treatment. At the same time, a generic drug was available in India for less than $800. And the generic manufacturer was making a profit at this price. So this means the whole gap between the $84,000 charged here and the $800 charged in India was simply excess profit. And that's the type of money that can get a drug company to become less than honest about the product that it sells. Now that's not an argument to take away profit from the industry. It's more of an argument to prevent a one-brand monopoly and increase competition, even if that means allowing more importation of generic drugs, which have been proven to be just as effective as their name-brand competitors. Kennedy points to government policies and relationships that he believes corrupts their ability to regulate the industry, like the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, or PDUFA, which is fair to point out. Enacted by Congress in 1992, PDUFA authorizes the FDA to collect fees from pharma companies when they submit new drug applications. In fiscal year 2022, user fees represented 46% of the FDA's total budget, of $6.2 billion. In his Wall Street Journal editorial, Kennedy said the practice creates a barrier of entry to smaller firms and puts bureaucrats' purse strings in the hands of the pharmaceutical industry. PDUFA was created in response to a bottleneck in new medicine approvals due to what the industry saw as an understaffed and underfunded FDA. User fees were adopted as a way to boost the FDA's ability to review new drug applications. And while payment doesn't guarantee their approval of a new drug, critics like RFK say setting a time frame for the FDA to review these drug applications may result in rushed or under-reviewed approvals. Even Robert Weissman, co-president of Public Citizen, a left-leaning consumer rights advocacy group based in Washington, is critical of the policy, saying, "The FDA has actually come to view the drug companies too frequently as their clients, and so it's absolutely compromised the independence of the agency." While I think everyone can get behind more research and monitoring of pharmaceuticals, it would be dumb not to acknowledge the amazing steps in modern medicine made by these companies. There's a reason why people still fly from all over the world to receive our advanced medical treatments. And I would be remiss to avoid RFK Jr.'s significant stake in the wellness industry, which is diametrically opposed to the pharmaceutical industry. So his criticisms have to be taken with that in mind, but that doesn't mean that they're totally false. Now we get to the ugly, at least for the most part, and that would be vaccines. There was a point where RFK said that the science on vaccine safety has huge deficits, and we're going to make sure that those scientific studies are done and that people can make informed choices about their vaccinations and their children's vaccinations. And if that was his consistent stance, I don't think anyone, including myself, would have any problem with that. I'm all for more data and more knowledge, and I think people should be able to make medical decisions for themselves. I'll say up front that if someone didn't get the COVID vaccine because they didn't like the fact that there hadn't been any intermediate to long-term safety testing done, I couldn't even blame them. But that isn't the case for vaccines that have been around for decades. The problem isn't about mistrust in the COVID vax specifically, or the politics surrounding it. It's that RFK will go on Lex Fridman podcast and say, there are no vaccines that are safe and effective. Now, he said in his Senate testimony that he was cut off before finishing his sentence.
And I said, there are no vaccines that are safe and effective, and I was going to continue for every person. Every medicine has people who are sensitive to them, including vaccines.
Right, so
he interrupted me at that point. I've corrected it many times, including on national TV. You know about this, Senator Wyden, so bringing this up right now is dishonest.
But let's just listen to it.
Difficult question. Can you name any vaccines that you think are good?
I think some of the live virus vaccines are probably averting more problems than they're causing. There's no vaccine that is, safe and effective.
Those are big words. What about the polio? Can we talk about the polio?
Well, here's the problem.
Yes.
Here's the problem. The polio vaccine contained a virus called simian virus 40, SV40. It's one of the most carcinogenic materials that is known to man. In fact, it's used now by scientists around the world to induce tumors in rats and guinea pigs in labs. But it was in that vaccine. 98 million people who got that vaccine in my generation got it. And now you've had this explosion of soft tissue cancers in our generation that kill many, 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 many more people than polio ever did. So if you say to me that the polio vaccine was effective against polio, I'm going to say yes. And if you say to me, did it kill more people, did it cause more deaths than avert, I would say, I don't know, because we don't have the data on that.
Even Donald Trump has now expressed concern, saying in a press briefing,
spread it out over a period of years, and they pump so much stuff into those beautiful little babies. It's a disgrace. I don't see it. I think it's very bad. They're pumping, it looks like they're pumping into a horse. You have a little fragile child, and you get a vat of 80 different vaccines, I guess, 80 different blends, and they pump it in.
The main claim being that vaccines have increased the rates of autism, affecting trust in the current childhood vaccine schedule. This is contradicted by the largest study on the topic released this year in Denmark. Principal investigator on the study, Anders Hvid, said that by analyzing data from more than 1 million Danish children between 1997 and 2018, they found no indication that the very small amount of aluminum used in the childhood vaccination program increases the risk of 50 different health outcomes during childhood, including asthma, allergies, autoimmune conditions, and neurodevelopmental disorders. Even the CDC's own website disagrees with the claim that vaccines are increasing the rate of autism. Dr. Yvonne Maldonado, a pediatric infectious disease expert at Stanford, reiterates this by saying, All of the data and evidence suggests that our vaccine schedule is incredibly safe and incredibly effective. In fact, it's probably the most effective vaccine schedule in the world. Kids get this roster of shots at a young age to make sure they don't catch dangerous diseases when they're most vulnerable. Maldonado goes on to say, some people who are worried about vaccines argue that the number of different antigens and other ingredients could overwhelm a child's immune system, but babies' immune systems can handle it. Children are exposed to far more stimulation naturally from microbes than from vaccines, and vaccines have been refined over the decades to minimize the number of ingredients they contain. Luckily, even the powerful CDC committee handpicked by Kennedy doesn't see vaccines in quite the same light, approving a new vaccine schedule that wouldn't alter it as much as many public health advocates expected. The panel tabled a proposal to delay vaccinating certain newborns for hepatitis B, did not recommend that states and localities require prescriptions for the COVID-19 vaccine, and endorsed allowing anyone 6 months or older to get a COVID shot. It's fine to continually research and test vaccines and the childhood vaccine schedule. Even Dr. Ofer Levy, a vaccine scientist at Harvard, would agree, saying, I think it's true that any vaccine schedule should periodically be assessed. But similar to something I said earlier, making an assertion that changes how millions of people view vaccines without any concrete evidence, simply saying that autism rates overall have gone up, is not helpful. Anyone with common sense would see that the reason why autism has skyrocketed is because we label anyone with a quirk as autistic now. And when you broaden the diagnosis so drastically, of course the rates of that diagnosis will increase. The reason why childhood mortality has dropped and life expectancy has risen is largely attributable to vaccines. That is scientifically undeniable. Now, I want RFK to be successful in his term as HHS Secretary in bettering the health and wellness of Americans. But by pushing what can only be called conspiracies, found by ignoring the data, he undercuts his credibility to push for actually positive changes and allows doubters to write off his ideas wholesale. As you can see, Make America Healthy Again is a complicated mixed bag of ideas that make RFK Jr. a pretty polarizing figure as the head of Health and Human Services. And while I'd love to see the good things implemented, like greater food transparency and more competition in the pharmaceutical industry, we need to drop the obviously bad things, like the one-dimensional mistrust of decades of medical and food science. And it would not be that difficult to do, but it seems right now that RFK and his close advisors are too hard-headed to see that. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think about the Make America Healthy Again movement and what you would change about it. If you enjoyed, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.